Hello again, and welcome to Aviation News Talk, where we talk general aviation with relevant news and flying tips for pilots and student pilots to help keep you safe. I'm Max Trescott. For our main topic today, I'll be talking about the new Pipistrel Panthera aircraft, which I was able to enjoy when the only one in the U.S. came to my home airport. Plus, I'll tell you about my favorite aviation book and how it just found its way back into my life. In our last episode, 170, we talked with Rob Mark about mastering the go-around, an important maneuver that all pilots need to understand in detail. So if you didn't hear that episode, you may want to check it out. And if the Aviation News Talk podcast is new to you, in whatever app that you're using to listen to us now, just click on the subscribe button so new episodes will download for free each week. I think you'll enjoy hearing about the Panthera today, and you won't want to miss future shows. This week in the news, rusty pilots are making news, and it's not good. If you fly your plane to Canada, there's something new you're going to need to bring along. And we've got an unusual story, and it's a real one, about a pilot who got hung up while flying around dressed as Santa Claus. All this and more, and the news starts now. From AOPA.org, the FAA requires Piper wing inspections. Wing spar corrosion in a hard-to-reach area of certain PA-28 and PA-32 models could cause a fatal failure, and the FAA requires inspections by borescope, access panel installation, wing removal, or other approved means within 12 months or 100 hours. The directive, published November 23rd as a final rule, with an effective date of December 28th, was prompted by reports of corrosion found in an area of the main wing spar not easily accessible for inspection, the FAA wrote. Within 12 months of the effective date or 100 hours time in service, whichever comes first, both left and right main spars must be visually inspected and all necessary corrective actions taken to address any corrosion that is discovered. Repeat inspections will be required every 7 years thereafter, and aircraft owners have the option to install access panels on the bottom of each wing, use a borescope fed through an existing access point, or complete the inspection in conjunction with a fuel tank installation or other major repair that requires wing removal. The FAA estimates the cost of each inspection at 2 hours of labor or $170, with an optional cost of $730, including parts and labor, to install access panels in the lower wing skin near the left and right spars. The FAA noted that unknown additional cost could be incurred depending upon what the inspection reveals. From ClaimsJournal.com, rusty pilots making flying errors is the next aviation headache. On September 15th, an Indonesian flight carrying 307 passengers and 11 crew to the northern city of Medan momentarily veered off the runway after landing, sparking an investigation by the country's transport safety regulator. It found that the pilot had flown less than 3 hours in the prior 90 days, and the first officer hadn't flown at all since February 1st. The incident underlies an emerging risk from the coronavirus pandemic. Pilots aren't getting enough opportunity to fly because airlines have grounded planes and scaled back operations due to a slump in demand for air travel. In its preliminary report, Indonesia's National Transportation Safety Committee said the pandemic has made it harder to maintain pilot proficiency and flying experience. The Lion Air aircraft involved was an Airbus SE A330, one of 10 in the carrier's fleet. Because Lion Air doesn't have a simulator for the A330, its pilots are trained at third-party facilities in Indonesia, Malaysia, and Singapore. COVID-19 travel restrictions have made those harder to access. So although this is a story about airline pilots, it is just as applicable to all pilots regardless of what you fly. So if you haven't been in the cockpit in the last 60 days or maybe 90 days, I implore you to go fly with a flight instructor for at least your first flight when you finally do return to the cockpit. And that applies regardless of why you haven't been flying. Today we're talking about it in the context of the pandemic, but the same principle applies anytime you've had a gap in your flying, regardless of why you weren't able to fly for some time. From AOPA.org, AOPA Flight Training Scholarship Application Window Open. Applications for AOPA's You Can Fly Program 2021 scholarships opened on December 1st. The 2020 program awarded 124 scholarships totaling more than $1 million with the help of generous donations to the AOPA Foundation. AOPA has awarded nearly $2.5 million in scholarship funding to 345 students and pilots in the past 2 years. Elizabeth Tennyson, executive director of AOPA's You Can Fly program, said, AOPA's mission is to protect your freedom to fly And these scholarships bring this vision alive by opening the sky to more people with that passion. These scholarships help current and future aviators at all points in their flying journey, especially those who may not have seen a path to the cockpit. The deadline for all scholarship applications is February 14th at 11:59 p.m. Eastern Time. With different goals for different aviators and those aspiring to become pilots, AOPA is offering flight training scholarships in several categories. And they also talk about the AOPA High School Flight Training Scholarship. It says, thanks to the generosity of the Ray Foundation, 80 high school students ages 15 to 18 will receive flight training scholarships in 2021. In 2020, 80 students received a scholarship for $10,000 each. Scholarship recipients will be able to use the money for direct flight training expenses to pursue a primary flight certificate, such as a private, sport, or recreational pilot license. The You Can Fly program is funded by charitable donations to the AOPA Foundation, a 501c3 organization. To be part of the solution, visit aopafoundation.org/donate. And related to that story, coincidentally, I received an email from one of our listeners, Daniel DeMoncus. He writes, I'm on the board of directors with the Leroy W. Homer Jr. Foundation. We provide fixed-wing flight training scholarships to people aged 16 to 23. Our scholarship application window is open now until January 31st. We have been in existence for 19 years. We are supported by the Ray Foundation, and we have been mentioned in AOPA numerous times. If you could help us reach additional people, that would be great. Please let me know if you have any questions. And Dan provided a couple links here. I'll just go ahead and mention one of them. And of course, there will be a link to this in the show notes. This is LeroyWHomerJr.org/scholarships/application. So there you have two sources of scholarships. Go ahead and start working on those applications. From avweb.com, Canada mandates 406 ELTs, and foreign aircraft will need that beacon. Foreign registered aircraft flying to Canada after November 25th, 2021 will have to have either an ELT capable of broadcasting simultaneously on 406 MHz and 121.5 MHz emergency signals, or have a portable 406 beacon on board as part of the country's new ELT rules. For aircraft that don't comply with the Canadian regulations, they can still fly in Canada with the approved 406 beacon. There is no requirement in the U.S., of course, for aircraft to have a 406 ELT. Instead, the FCC has banned the manufacture of ELTs that operate on 121.5 MHz only. All new ELTs emit both signals simultaneously, but there are still thousands of the older 121.5 devices in use. In Canada, all aircraft except gliders, balloons, airships, ultralights, and gyroplanes will have to have the new ELTs some sooner than later. Aircraft operated primarily for recreation will need the new ELTs within 5 years, but everything else, including foreign aircraft, have to be equipped by November 25th, 2021. From generalaviationnews.com, personal carbon monoxide detector for pilots debuts. Just introduced is Geiger CO, a personal carbon monoxide detector designed specifically for pilots. The detector provides a real-time alarm when carbon monoxide levels are dangerously high in the cockpit. The auto-calibrating unit includes an aural alarm and a visual LED scale, according to company officials. When flying, pilots should place it where it's visible while in flight. Because of its small size, it could be hung anywhere, according to inventor James Wiebe of Chipper Aerospace, Radiant Technology, and Thin Air Energy. The product was designed in response to pilot requests, said Wiebe. Quote, pilots want something that is very small, rechargeable, and quickly capable of identifying carbon monoxide, he said. Because it is designed to be attached to a keychain, it is also desirable for anyone who travels, for use in truck cabs or hotel rooms, for example. The introductory price is $99, so you could have to move quickly. That's available only through December 31st. After that, the price becomes $149. And just to follow on to that, if you want to learn all there is to know about the dangers of carbon monoxide poisoning while flying, please check out episodes 88 and episode 90 of the Aviation News Talk podcast if you haven't heard them already, where we talked about carbon monoxide poisoning. And of course, I'll have a link to those episodes in the show notes. From avweb.com, Embraer working on an electric crop duster. Well, that's a new one. I hadn't heard of that before. Embraer has partnered with the Brazilian arm of Portuguese energy company EDP to build a pure electric version of the EMB 2013 Ipanema aerial application aircraft. The first test flight is scheduled for early 2021. Quote, Through EDP's Smart Division, the multinational of Portuguese origin announced a financial contribution for the acquisition of an electric storage and recharging technology solution for the aircraft with 100% electric propulsion. EDP says it's leading a transition to a low-carbon economy and that the alliance with Embraer represents a new form of our investment in electric mobility, helping to position Brazil as a leading player in this market. And as I think about electric aircraft, this one makes perfect sense because you're not flying very far, and so it would be easy to recharge between aerial applications with crop dusters. And from sfchronicle.com, man dressed as Santa crashes aircraft into power lines in Sacramento suburb. And just in case you're worried, Santa came out of this okay. The story says, because it's 2020, a man dressed as Santa Claus and delivering candy canes to neighborhood children in a Sacramento suburb on Sunday morning crashed his aircraft into power lines and had to be rescued from the live wires. The unidentified Chris Kringle fortunately was not electrocuted as he flew his ultralight type aircraft, by the way, it looked to me like a powered parachute, into residential power lines, dangling upside down for an hour before firefighters could rescue him, said Sacramento Fire District Captain Chris Vestal. He was uninjured and coherent, Vestal said. Quote, "We don't know where he was coming from or where exactly he was going." Firefighters were called to the scene shortly after 11 a.m. near the intersection of 7th Avenue and M Street in Rio Linda and found the red and white Santa hanging upside down in his aircraft with his red, white, and blue parachute tangled in the lines. When firefighters arrived, Vestal said the lines were live and had to be shut down by Sacramento Municipal Utility District workers. About 200 homes in the area lost power, he said. Eventually, Santa, holding onto a firefighter a little more tightly than he's used to handling the reindeer, slowly got lowered from the lines to the street below. The FAA is investigating the crash. Preliminary reports say the powered parachute lost power on takeoff near a school in Rio Linda and then hit and became suspended in power lines, said FAA spokeswoman Emma Duncan. Nearby residents told firefighters that the man delivers candy from his aircraft every year. Said Vestal, "Unfortunately, he was unable to meet that goal on this day. We do commend him for doing that and can appreciate the timing to try and bring the spirit, especially this year." It was the first time Vestal could remember Santa Claus crashing a flying machine into Sacramento area power lines, but 2 years ago, the fire captain responded to one who was stuck in a chimney trying to rob a bar in the town of Carmichael. Well, that's the news for this week. Coming up, my weekly updates. And then we'll get to our main topic, which is the Pipistrel Panthera, all right here on the Aviation News Talk podcast. And first up, we have a fun flying destination from listener Chris Miller.
Hello, Max. I just wanted to pass along my fun flying destination of Talkeetna, Alaska, Papa Alpha Tango Kilo. It's on the rail route between Anchorage and Fairbanks, about an hour-and-a-half flight south of Fairbanks over the Alaska Range, or a half-hour flight north out of Anchorage over the Chugach Range. It's a beautiful little airport in a nice valley with float plane lakes nearby, and you can come right on in and land your airplane right next to downtown. It's a quaint little tourist town. You can just walk in from the airport and experience many attractions, including the base camp for Denali National Park flight seeing and climbing of the mountain, including many of the great histories of Alaska. There's restaurants, there's lodging. In the summer, there's tourism operations all over the place. So it's a great little destination, very convenient, fuel on the field, everything a pilot needs to have a great destination day. So I encourage you to try Talkeetna, Alaska. Thank you.
Chris, thank you so very much for taking the time to share that with us. And I think most pilots have a favorite place that they like to fly to. And if that's you, why don't you go ahead and take a couple of moments to write a few sentences about it and then record it and send it to us so that we can share it with all of the listeners. Doing that is really easy. You can just use the Voice Memos app on your smartphone and email me the file, or you can go out to aviationnewstalk.com, click on listener questions at the top. Even though it's not a question, you still click on the same place. Then use the SpeakPipe app to record up to 90 seconds, and it will be automatically emailed to me. If you do record a file on Voice Memos app, just send it to aviationnewstalk@gmail.com. Now let me tell you a little bit about my favorite book of all times. And I mention it because the holidays are just a great time for reading, and I'm sure you'll enjoy this one. I first read the book about 20 years ago, and I absolutely fell in love with it. And then I lent it to a customer of mine when I was working for HP, but I never got it back. Well, the book finally came back into my life in an interesting way. You may recall that about 6 months ago, I mentioned that I lost my best friend, Ron Carmichael, who was about 15 years older than me and who died of cancer. His wife called me and asked if I would pick up 3 big boxes of aviation books that Ron owned and find a good home for the books. Well, when I opened one of the boxes, there it was, lying flat on the very top of the pile, Ron's copy of my favorite book. And when I mentioned the book to his wife, she was actually able to quote from a scene in the book since it had been a favorite of Ron's as well. The book is Passage of Flight, and it's a memoir written by Rinker Buck about really a simpler time. Back in the 1960s, in the summer of 66, it's all about 2 brothers, aged 15 and 17, who restored a Piper Cub during the winter and then flew it from New Jersey to California and back by themselves. But the book is much more than just an airplane adventure story, and it's a very good one, by the way, at that. It's also a coming-of-age story about a 15-year-old boy who had a very difficult relationship with his father and how his view of his father evolved over time. And it's also about his relationship with his older, high-achiever brother. So there's really something in the book for everyone, and I highly recommend it as a wonderful read. And by the way, the scene that Barbara remembered is one of my favorite, in which the boys were dropping something from a Piper Cub. And I won't tell you more about that. People who've read the book will know what I'm talking about. And of course, I've included a link to the show notes, which will take you to Amazon, where you can buy your copy of Passage of Flight. And I want to tell you about an interesting video that I came across. This is of a CH-47 Chinook Very Large Helitanker, a VLHT with night flying capability, and it's being operated by Colson Aviation under an 83-day contract in collaboration with Southern California Edison and the Orange County Fire Authority. And the video shows a water drop of 3,000 gallons from this helicopter. And it really is quite dramatic, especially when you figure some helicopters only drop 300 gallons. So look for a link in the show notes and you can see that Chinook dropping 3,000 gallons at a time. Now, let me tell you a little bit about what I've been up to. You may have noticed I haven't had a new show out for 3 weeks. Well, for the first time ever, I had 2 interviews scheduled over a 2-week period, and both of them ended up canceling for various reasons. So I'm rebooking those guests, both of which had happened sometime in January, and I apologize for missing a couple of shows. Also, longtime listeners know that from mid-March through mid-February, I wasn't teaching in the air to reduce the risk of catching or spreading COVID among my clients. And unfortunately, as everyone knows, COVID levels have spiked again. And I stopped teaching about a month ago on November 28th. On that day, we had 760 new cases in my county, which was a new high, but it didn't stop there. About 2 weeks later, we reached 2,350 new cases in the county, and today we had around 2,250, so just an incredibly high level. And just in the last few weeks, I've learned of 3 flight instructors who have all tested positive for coronavirus. None of them were local, but still it shows the potential for catching the virus when you're sitting together in a small cockpit. So I expect I'll be home until new cases drop substantially, and I'm guessing I won't be back in the air until at least February and quite possibly later than that. So it's been a crazy year, but I was happy that I was able to get in 11 weeks of flying this past fall and help 4 people pass their check rides. Now from the good news department, this comes from Patreon supporter Joseph Smith Stewart. He says, "Hi, Max. Just wanted to let you know that I was able to reschedule my check ride this past Monday and passed. Hope you and the family are well. Regards, Joe." Well, Joe, congratulations to you. That is great news. And from new Patreon supporter Steve Schofield, he says, "Thanks for a great podcast, Max. I earned my private ticket in 2003 and flew until 2013. I took about 6 years off and renewed my BFR in November 2019. I'm working on getting my confidence back, and I'm loving the podcast. Congratulations." Well, thank you so much, Steve, and congratulations for taking the steps that it took to get back in the air after a long gap there. And of course, if you would like to support the show, just like Joseph and Steve and about 3 to 4% of our listeners do, well, this would be a great time. As we're coming up on the first of the month when we always lose a half a dozen supporters because their credit cards expire, and many of those people just never come back to us. There are 2 ways to donate. You can donate monthly via Patreon by going out to aviationnewstalk.com/awesome. And depending upon what level you donate at, there are all kinds of goodies you'll receive. Also, you can use PayPal at aviationnewstalk.com/PayPal and make either a monthly or a one-time donation. And when you sign up, I'll read your name, which will get literally heard by thousands of listeners in over 140 countries, including Finland, Portugal, and Kenya. Now let me tell you about some of the great people who signed up to support the show. Brian Plank, Dustin Ballant, Casey Welch, Steve Schofield, who came in at the $35 a month level, Patrick Grubbs, who edited his pledge up to $35, and Paul Peterson, who also edited his pledge up to $35 a month. So that entitles them to access to my online courses at pilotlearning.com. We also had some one-time donations come in from PayPal. My thanks to Randolph Lesota II, $50. William Felon sent $100. He says, Max, although I'm a monthly contributor through Patreon, I've been meaning to send you this as a token of appreciation for your amazing work and dedication. Merry Christmas. I fly an SR22T out of the Dominican Republic. Well, hello to you, William, down in the DR. We also had a check from Preston Root. He sends an annual contribution. This was for $250. Thank you so very much. And of course, we have our honor roll of mega supporters. These are the people who donate $50 a month or more, and I mention their name every month on at least one news show. Plus, I send them one of my books after 2 months. These mega supporters are Brian Deere, who lives here in Northern California and flies a Turbo 206. Tyson Weiss, he's co-founder and CEO of ForeFlight. I think you know it's a popular EFB app. Bruce Dickerson, he's a financial planner living in Georgia, and he flies a K-35 Bonanza. Victor Vogel, who lives in Central PA and flies a Cirrus. Tim Delaney, who is a wealth manager in Santa Rosa and flies an SR22 out of the Santa Rosa airport. Stephen Elop, he flies a Turbo 182 and a Citation CJ3+. He's now the CEO of API Jet. Mike Williams, president of Keomac and TCB Composites, which makes composite spinners and bulkheads for GA aircraft, and he flies a 172. Seth Lake, he's a DPE down in Arkansas, gives check rides, but he also specializes in teaching them multi-engine rating in his beach travel airs. So if you'd like to get your multi-rating, check him out at vsl.aero. Rick Miller instructs in the Cincinnati area, both out of the Lunken Flight Training Center and with private owners of Pipers, Cessnas, Beechcraft, and Cicadas. He'd love to teach full-time, but he still has that day job. Justin Winters, who brokers real estate on Lake Keowee in South Carolina, he flies a 2019 SR22. Carl and Ann Rossi of Maine Coon Cat Aviation, they have a pair of Cessna T240 aircraft and a 2021 Piper M350 on order. Johnny McDade, who I've met, he's a singer-songwriter, musician, and record producer. Jim Goldfuss, who just sent me some information about an accident that occurred at his home airport, which is Republic Airport on Long Island in New York. Jim's training for his CFI and II, and he's teaching aviation currently at Pilot Proficiency International as an advanced and instrument ground instructor. So if you're looking for individual instruction in person or online, reach out to him on his Facebook page at Ground.9. Charlie Mason flies out of Austin and is working on his instrument rating in a 172. Vincent Salimi, he's the vice mayor for the city of Pinole, California, and he's the owner of Salimi Construction Management in San Francisco. Jim Hopp, he's a CFI. I've known him a long time. He teaches at Advantage Aviation at the Palo Alto Airport in California. Lars Litjens, he's our youngest patron supporter. He flies a Redbird J Velocity simulator, and someday he'll be big enough to fly his dad's Cessna 205. Dad sells boats in western states at boulderboats.com. Joseph Sheehan flew in the Navy for 8 years. He's already racked up a couple hundred hours in his new Vision jet. Josiah Freeman, working on his instrument rating. Dylan Caldwell, he's a medical examiner and AME in Florida at the Naples Municipal Airport. So if you need a basic med, second or third class flight physical, contact him now at aviatorsclinic.com. William Birch, he donates to the show in the memory of his son, Lieutenant J.G. Wallace Birch, who was a naval aviator. Don Hakela with Professional Instrument Courses. They conduct 10-day instrument courses, IFR finish-up and IFR refresher courses at iflyifr.com. Stephen Bush, he's the owner of Lone Star Helicopters in Lago Vista, Texas. He mentions that they do all kinds of helicopter work, so if you want to get a rating, go to lonestarheli.com. Don Dillman, he's a professional pilot who runs an airline flight department. He's also a CFI and flies a Bonanza. Rick Mattis, owner of Pointwise, which makes CFD, that's computational fluid dynamics simulation software, used by aerospace companies. You can find them at pointwise.com. John Tosto lives in Flint, Michigan. He rents some of the 4 airplanes at the Greater Flint Pilots Association. He also co-owns a Cherokee 6 that they've updated with a Garmin G3X and GTN 650. Vic Bajaj, he's an SR22 owner here in the San Francisco Bay Area that I've flown with. Rick Love, he's a Knoxville, Tennessee-based Cirrus CSIP instructor, formerly worked for the factory. He specializes in finish-up courses for instrument and commercial ratings. He's also available for Cirrus transition training and recurrent training, ferry flights, and accompaniment home flights. He can be reached at ricklovecfi@gmail.com. Mark Holzbach, he lives in southwestern PA. He's a longtime aviation enthusiast who wants to get his private when he retires, and he runs bodandsteel.com, which manufactures industrial fasteners. Tim Crawford, he's flying a DA-40 at Crosswinds Aviation at the Oakland County Airport north of Detroit. He runs a company called BrainSpring, and they help kids with dyslexia. Greg Van, he's a senior AME at the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota, and he's host of the Mayo Clinic Clear Approach, which is a podcast that discusses medical issues for pilots. James Kerr, he's thinking about buying an SR22 for business travel. His company makes security screens for protecting your home, and you can find out more at bosssecurity.screens.com. Arel English, he's a relatively new CFI currently working on his double I. He and a friend have created a website to make free flight planning modern and fast. The site is called Flyway, and you can check it out yourself at flyway.cc. Coming up next, my conversation with Andy Chan about the Pipistrel Panthera. All right here on the Aviation News Talk podcast. And now let's talk about the Pipistrel Panthera. It is a very sleek and sexy four-place aircraft that's been under development for about 8 years, and it's now available. There is just one of them in the entire country, and it's currently on a tour so that potential buyers can get a demo flight. I was scheduled to fly it, but by the time it arrived here, I had already stopped flying with local clients due to COVID, and to be consistent, I decided not to fly. But I did walk all around the Panthera, sat in it, and did everything but fly it. I talked with Andy Chan and Shavona Reed of Rudder Aviation. After we talked, Andy mentioned to me that one of the magazines had written about the Panthera and called it a Cirrus killer. Now, he came right out and said that it is not, and I agree for a number of reasons. But that's not to take away anything from the Panthera in any way. It is a beautiful aircraft, and it is faster than the Cirrus, partially because it has retractable landing gear, which the Cirrus does not. But retractable landing gear usually adds to maintenance costs. So you can see there are all kinds of trade-offs in the design of any airplane. Now, one thing that may initially limit sales of the Panthera is that it's not certified in the normal category, as is the Cirrus, and that has a few disadvantages. But if you're willing to live with those disadvantages, which we'll talk about with Andy, you'll save $50,000 and you won't have to wait a couple years for the certified version to come out. By the way, Andy and I were outside when we recorded this, and there was some taxiway construction going on, so some of the audio may not be as good as you typically hear on this show. Now here's our conversation with Andy Chan. So Andy, before we talk about the Panthera, tell us about the company you co-founded, Rudder Aviation, and about your relationship with Pipistrel.
Yeah, absolutely. So Rudder Aviation is actually the second flight school that I started in my flying career. I've been flying my whole professional adult career. And so today we are the fixed-base operator at Inverness, Florida, and operate the fixed-base operation maintenance facility, full-service flight school to include private instrument, commercial, tail wheel, aerobatic, and glider training. And then throughout the course, we had been conducting business with Pipistrel using the wonderful Pipistrel Alpha in our flight school, and have been really impressed with the flight characteristics, the performance, the cost, the quality of the aircraft, and every student absolutely loves the Pipistrel. And the reason why is, it burns 2.3 gallons an hour in flight, and because of that, we are able to offer the Pipistrel Alpha, a brand new airplane, for rent cheaper than a 172. And so students really like that. So with the experience of having operated the Pipistrel aircraft and knowing that the Panthera was coming, we, on one of the visits to the factory in Slovenia, we approached the founder and CEO of the company, Ivo, and just kind of said, hey, the Panthera is an amazing airplane, and you're going to need proper representation here in the United States. And a lot of it goes back to training. Anytime you launch a new aircraft, training is important so that, every Panthera we sell is going to be sold to a family member of ours, someone who joins the Right Rudder Aviation family, and we want them to go home at the end of the day. And we know we can improve the chances of that with proper training. So our pitch to Pipistrel was, there's a lot of brokers out there, there's a lot of people involved in aircraft sales, but it really needs to be a training organization that provides the Panthera support. And so around that end, we've developed a 25-hour, 2-week transition course for every Panthera pilot and owner.
So the Panthera that you're currently flying here is an experimental exhibition aircraft. Just what does that mean, and what are some of the limitations of that category?
Excellent question, and there's a lot of confusion about that in the marketplace. Of course, the most popular version of experimental aircraft is what we call EAB, or experimental amateur built. That is the so-called 51% rule, where a individual needs to build at least 51% of it for it to be considered experimental amateur built. The Pipistrel Panthera is not that. This is a factory-built aircraft, fully factory-built, and it is able to get imported and issued its airworthiness certificate under the experimental exhibition rules. And basically there are some restrictions around that, but that category was pretty much created by the FAA in order to allow certain types of aircraft that were factory built but not certified to fly in U.S. airspace. So there's a lot of different aircraft that fly under this criteria. For example, when you see a P-51 or a T-6, those are all aircraft that we know to be high quality and very great, but they were never certified under FAA regulations. So most of those either fly under experimental exhibition or in some cases air race. With the Panthera, there are some restrictions. One is you have to have a program letter, which we supply. But basically that says, hey, I'm operating this aircraft in accordance with the regulations, and I'm going to exhibit this aircraft. And once a year, you put a letter together and says, hey, I'm going to exhibit this aircraft at these locations. Typically, it's going to be Oshkosh or Sun and Fun for us. We're going to pretty much every opportunity we can to demonstrate the aircraft. But for other people, it might just be an EA pancake fly-in breakfast, at their local airport or an airport away, and that would also qualify. And part of that is, if people do purchase the experimental exhibition version, we do legitimately make them members of our family, like we discussed, but also our sales organization. So we are asking them to demonstrate the aircraft and promote the aircraft legitimately, because that will help the brand get out there in the wild. The other restriction that is a little bit annoying is you're allowed to go over, under, or around Bravo, and you can go inside Bravo. However, you have to call 1 hour ahead of time on the landline to notify them. Now, that's an odd rule, because when you call, they're always like, why are you calling me? I don't really care. But it is a box you have to check, and we have done that on certain occasions, and then you just go in. So that's not that much of a hassle.
And what about flying over densely populated areas?
Right. So over densely populated areas, now that is an interesting restriction, because when you ask the FAA to define densely populated areas, specifically as it applies to the experimental exhibition certificate, which we have asked them to do in the past, you get different answers depending on who you ask within the FAA, of course. So the answer that we get the most from the FAA, most consistently, is as long as you're able to glide away from population or pull a parachute away from population where you're not putting other people at unnecessary risk, then that's okay. So we don't want to do repeated touch and goes over a densely populated area, because that could be construed as operating in that manner. But you could take off from a densely populated area, go away, come back and land, and that's deemed acceptable. We have run that by the FAA specifically, but we wouldn't want to do repetitive touch and goes in a densely populated area.
Got it. I understand. Okay. So fundamentally, you're allowed to land at any airport in the United States.
That's our understanding. Again, with Bravo, you would want to call ahead and then get that approval.
Now, if someone bought a new Panthera today, it sounds like it'd be in the same category. What about the certified version? When is that coming, and how is that going to be different?
Excellent question. So the Panthera has been in development for quite some time, and they've done the majority of actually physical testing that is required for EASA certification. There's still a lot of paperwork to go. EASA works a little bit differently than the FAA, so it's somewhat more predictable with respect to timing of certification. So Pipistrel, the certification team, I'm in constant contact with them, and they have a 90% certainty that EASA certification for the Panthera will occur in 2022. Now, once EASA certification occurs, then they will kick it over to the FAA, who is already roped in and is aware of the Panthera development. And the FAA will then, of course, we're looking for their good graces. Now, the FAA is a little bit more of a question mark because of the way they're set up. So that could be relatively quickly or could take a little bit longer. We're hoping for late 2022 or maybe early 2023 FAA reciprocity.
Got it. Before we go out and walk around the airplane, tell me about some of the aircraft specifications.
Yeah, so the Panthera was really designed to be the ultimate personal airplane. And here's what I mean by that. The founder and CEO of the company, Evo, he said, we need to make an aircraft for my personal needs. And here's what we need. We need 4 seats. We need 1,100 pound useful load. We need 200 knots and we need 1,000 nautical mile range. And we got really close to that. So here's what I actually, in real life, we can demonstrate this. And that's what we're here doing on the U.S. tour, is demonstrating it so people can actually see these numbers. But maximum straight and level unaccelerated flight that I've personally seen and been able to sustain is 198. So that's really close to the 200 knots. Economy cruise, we got really close there as well. So economy cruise is 185 knots at around 75 to 8,500 feet at 10.8 gallons per hour. So we got really close to that 10 gallon per hour number. And in fact, if you go to 12.5, which we have been doing a lot, we can do 178 knots at 9.2 gallons an hour. So in terms of fuel efficiency, I think we really achieved something there. We do have 1,100 pound useful load. And with the optional extended range tanks, we can definitely go way more than 1,000 nautical miles. So from a design perspective, I think Pipistrel did an amazing job achieving those goals.
So tell me about the engine and also about the fuel tank options.
Yeah, so the engine is the very well proven and extremely reliable Lycoming IO 540, producing 260 horsepower. It was chosen initially when they launched the Panthera. They selected the Lycoming IO 390 engine because at the time, Lycoming had committed to approving the engine for automotive fuel use. After they put the IO390 on the original Panthera, Lycoming came back and said, hey, we're not going to do that. It's going to be 100 lead only. And one of the design specifications for the aircraft was that it needed to be able to have the ability to burn automotive fuel, or MOGAS as we call it. So when Lycoming kind of backtracked on that, Pipistrel went back to the drawing board and they picked the IO540. This particular variant of the IO540 is derated to the 260 horsepower and is approved for automotive fuel. And that's why this particular version was used. And there's some benefits to that around the world. Here in the U.S., 100 low-leaded is readily available and relatively inexpensive. So most U.S. customers are definitely going to put 100 low-leaded in it. But in other countries, 100 low-leaded can be 20 times the cost here, whereas automotive fuel might only be 5 times the cost as it is here. And so that can definitely reduce the cost of flying to people all around the world.
And what about how much fuel you carry and the options?
Excellent question. So the standard tanks is 54 gallons and extended range tanks add another 39 gallons on top of that. So the extended range tanks definitely give you some long legs on the aircraft.
And tell us about some of the airspeed, stall speed, flaps, landing gear speed, things like that.
Yeah, so the stall speed is I think they did a great job with that, because with the gear and flaps down, our stall speed is 55. Clean were 60, so still a very respectable kind of slow number for how fast the aircraft can operate. With the landing gear system, it's an amazing landing gear system. It's titanium, made out of titanium for weight and strength, and it's trailing link to provide maximum comfort and safety for the occupants. And for efficiency, when the gear goes up, there's no part of the gear exposed. And they did that by creating 11 gear doors on the Panthera. So when you look, there's gear doors everywhere. And that gives a lot of efficiency in cruise flight, of course. The downside is the gear extension speed and the flap extension speed is a little slower than you would like at 106, because there's so many gear doors and they're at different angles and things of that nature. But what we find is if you manage your speed properly, bring your power back and push the prop forward, then you can use that prop and engine as a little bit of a brake. So you get to 106, no problem.
And what about VNE and parachute deployment speed?
So VNE is 205 knots, and that's to prevent flutter. I've taken it very close to that and not experienced any type. You don't even know the aircraft is going that fast. It handles speed exceptionally well. Deployment speed of the parachute is pretty high at 195 knots. So usually, like I said, we're cruising at 185 knots. So you would have the ability to deploy the parachute in almost any scenario unless you're in a direct dive.
That's excellent. Let's go walk around the airplane.
Absolutely. All right, so continuing to explain a little bit about the Panthera. The Panthera is made out of about 98% carbon fiber. It's almost 100% carbon fiber. And that contributes to the lightweight. We have an 1,800-pound empty weight, which is fairly light for a four-place airplane, especially for an aircraft of this speed. But they do use some other fibers in the construction as well. So the wings actually separate at the wing root relatively easily. It's a great design, again, something that comes from its glider heritage. But that the area where the spar joins up is actually fiberglass instead of carbon fiber because fiberglass is easier to inspect. It's a kind of a clear layer versus a black layer of carbon fiber. So there is some fiberglass in the aircraft. And as you look around, you see this A-pillar and the pillar that goes around the sides. The passenger compartment, the entire passenger compartment, has a very robust carbon fiber roll cage built in. So it's very lightweight, exceptionally strong, and that carbon fiber is covered in Kevlar. Kevlar is widely known for being used in bulletproof vests because of its ability to stop shards and protect against objects penetrating through. And so what you end up with is a very, very safe passenger compartment that's really designed around safety. Speaking of safety, if we look towards the rear, we can see actually the little hatch just aft of the back window, and that is where the full airframe ballistic parachute would pop out of, rocket assisted, of course, if you were to pull the parachute handle, which is located under this protective cover. The full airframe ballistic parachute is something that I personally believe every aircraft should come with at this point in time because it definitely enhances safety. We teach that if we do have an engine failure, the preference is to glide, but there are certain scenarios in which, of course, you want to have a parachute, and parachutes have been demonstrated to save lives. So in terms of safety, we not only have the full carbon fiber roll cage, but also the full airframe ballistic parachute, and that definitely enhances safety.
All right, so we've just climbed into the airplane. Tell us about the inside.
Control of the Pipistrel Panthera is achieved by the center stick, and it sits about here when we're in flight condition. It is a wonderful stick, and what I mean by that is we have pushrod tubes for the ailerons, pushrod tube for the elevator, and it's a very precise control system. So when you're flying it, it's actually a fingertip airplane, very, very precise, and small movements are all you need to affect the change that you're looking for, particularly at higher speeds. Of course, if you're slowing down, you may need additional input. You can see it's very well executed with the leather wrap and carbon fiber touches. The black button we have is push to talk, red is autopilot disconnect, and then we have very convenient access to our rudder and elevator trim. But one of the things people notice when they fly the aircraft is how precise the steering and the handling is. And it really kind of feels like a flying sports car. So in a way, it is a traveling machine, but it's also a machine that is a lot of fun and kind of handles like it's on rails. We already mentioned, of course, we are equipped with the full airframe ballistic parachute. Here's the red handle here. We do keep our safety pin in there while we're on the ground so that we don't accidentally activate that. And like we discussed, the deployment speed is 195 knots, maximum deployment speed. And so that makes it so you're able to use it through almost all phases of flight. Looking to the rear of the aircraft, you'll notice we have very well appointed high-end leather seats. It's the first cut of the hide. Very, very premium. We absolutely love the interior. And if you look at the back seat, it's actually fairly roomy from the back seat perspective. Plenty of leg room. And also we have the third door, which makes ingress and egress significantly easier for people getting in and out of the aircraft. The inside of the Panthera, as you're looking around, you'll see that it's really truly designed around the human form factor. Very ergonomically designed with people in mind. And that sounds like a logical thing, but when you think back to aircraft designed in the 50s or 60s, and what comes to mind in my head is the Piper Comanche, because I had one for a while, is the instrument panel they just kind of had instruments and they put them anywhere there was space, and the layout wasn't logical. And that's all been changed and modernized. And in this aircraft, you'll see that everything is very centrally located and well placed and thought out. So if we take a look down, one example is the fuel selector valve. On say Cessnas, you have to reach down in the middle, or on Pipers, on some you have to reach on the left side. And anytime you're reaching down like that, moving your head around, especially in IMC conditions, that can contribute to spatial disorientation. So a manufacturer should do their best to minimize those sorts of movements. So as you can see, the fuel selectors here, it's very tactile, very deliberate when you make a change. So this while being a small thing, in my opinion, it definitely enhances safety over being in a difficult to reach position. And in fact, both pilots have the ability to reach the fuel selector. Moving forward, I really love this throttle quadrant that Pipistrel has engineered and built. Again, going with the safety-minded mindset, you can see that each lever is of a different height, a different shape, a different color, and a different texture. And what that means is if I'm flying in IMC and I'm very comfortable with the aircraft, if I need to make a change to the engine configuration, I can do so by feel without necessarily looking down, again, enhancing safety. So I know that the prop control, has these 3 ridges on top, whereas the mixture is round. So of course they're in different positions, but again, the color, texture, and shape truly, in my opinion, enhance safety. And the tactile feel of it is extremely premium, very well built and robust. We have the go-around button right here on the throttle, which is, again, just extremely ergonomic. Moving up, we have this panel here, which I'll go ahead and let's turn this on. So we'll turn the avionics on here for a second. And what we have here is a LED panel that Pipistrel has installed, and you'll see we do have rudder and elevator trim position indicator on here, in addition to our climate control information. That's all well and dandy, but actually one of the main reasons to have this screen is as a backup. And with this being an IFR cross-country machine, you want to have backups. So if we simply push a button, that screen, instead of being climate control and trim, it doubles as a position indicator for all 3 landing gear, our flap position, and our fuel quantity indicators as well. So this panel, a lot of people ask, well, why is that panel there? And the answer is, in case you were to lose your LEDs or your display on another system. Looking around, we have a lot of glass here in this panel, which is, let me make it a little brighter. And the glass here on this is all Garmin. So we have our Garmin G3X as our PFD, primary flight display. And in the center, we have the Garmin Autopilot, the GTN 750XI, 650XI, and as an MFD, we have another G3X. I truly love this system because it is touchscreen. I know there's a lot of debate between touchscreen and button, and physical buttons. But personally, after having used both G1000, Cirrus Perspective, G500, 600, and the G3X, my personal preference is the G3X. I find the menu system to be very intuitive, and when I'm looking to accomplish a particular task, I find it to be simpler and quicker to accomplish that task than some of the other versions. So I truly love the avionics package here. Again, everything's very centrally located, and you have every type of information that you're looking for from, the Garmin map, the VFR or IFR charts, which you can pull up very simply. Of course, we have waypoint information. I'm using this all the time to pull up information about runway, about the weather at a particular airport, frequencies, which of course you just touch a button and that pops it in automatically. You have your flight plan information, weather, terrain, pretty much everything you need. And I've been using this terrain feature a lot. Me being a pilot from Florida and flying in areas that I'm unfamiliar with, I find the terrain feature to be incredibly comforting and definitely safety enhancing. And I did not realize the value of that, to be honest, until you start flying in mountain conditions. The 750, of course, very well known to be extremely robust IFR GPS navigator. And one of the things about the 750 that's great is, of course, you can load up your charts and your plates, and it overlays GPS position on that. The G3X does the same thing as well. The 650 there is a backup, and I primarily use this. I really, truly enjoy having the 650 because I typically have it in this configuration where I devote the bottom screen to a traffic display only. And what I find is typically I have my PFD on engine instrumentation. I'm always monitoring that constantly. And I'm always also monitoring traffic that's on ADS-B. Now, we have to keep in mind that not all traffic is ADS-B equipped, such as gliders, aircraft not equipped with a alternator, hot air balloons. So we can't rely on that only as a source, but it is a great source of information. And then the second PFD or MFD, I typically set that up, just on another display for information. One of the things about the cockpit that you'll see is it's kind of borrows from turbine aircraft with this top little bar here. And I think they did a great job with the layout. So over here we have the master warning, master caution, and fuel level warning lights. You can see our master warning's on, and that's because, of course, we have no fuel pressure, we have no oil pressure, and of course we're drawing quite a number of amps, so we should continue this. But that is there to enhance safety. We have our landing gear selector, and then our landing gear position indicator. And this is a great backup. This is the Mid-Continent instrument SAM. It's a very robust, dedicated backup instrument, and it's just rock solid, and it's there. It has its own internal backup battery for enhanced safety. We have our flap switch and position indicator, and then cockpit dimmers. So very well thought out, cockpit. Over here we have all of our switches, very easy to reach. Very much you could tell, for example, the avionics are on because of this green light. pitot heat is not on, but if we turn it on, we see that on. I'm going to turn it off just because that's going to be a big draw. The buttons are very easy to access. And, we have some blanks here. Probably people are saying, well, what goes there? This aircraft is the base, so-called base model aircraft. But if you had de-icing or if you had air conditioning, you could incorporate those switches, or the manufacturer would incorporate those switches here.
And I understand you've got some type of backup battery. Tell us about that.
Yes, so a little bit of a different design than some of the competitors. We have a single alternator in this aircraft. That single alternator, of course, is monitored by the G3X, and we saw that we were drawing 9 amps, while the engine was off and we had the avionics on. So there's big warnings there if you're drawing amps and you don't have the alternator on. But if you did lose your alternator, which is a possibility, we do have our primary ship's battery, which is commanded by this master switch here. And that would provide us with approximately 1 hour of electronic runtime if we did lose our alternator. And that would give us hopefully sufficient time to find an airport and land. But if it didn't, we do have a second master switch, which is a totally separate bus, totally separate backup battery. And that battery would power the primary flight display, the GTN 750, and of course the Mid-Continent instrument SAM. That would give us an additional 45 minutes of runtime. Now, if that depletes, then the Mid-Continent instrument SAM again has its own integral backup battery as well.
So if people wanted to buy a Panthera, what do they need to do?
So the Panthera is currently available in 2 different configurations. The first one we discussed a little bit about is the factory-built experimental exhibition. That version of the aircraft is available in 9 to 12 months from the time an order is placed. We're also selling the fully certified, fully FAA certified version. And the delivery time for those aircraft is either late 2022 or early 2023. So, of course, if someone's looking to purchase an aircraft, we highly recommend getting a hold of us at Rudder Aviation, RudderAviation.com, or visit our Facebook page. And that's the best way to get a hold of us and purchase a Panthera.
So tell me about support, the replacement parts, things like that. Where would people get parts if they need them? So
first off, there are a number of shops and parts available for this aircraft as it stands. Here's what I mean by that. The engine we discussed is Lycoming IO 540. Parts everywhere, mechanics everywhere know how to work on that engine. The avionics, all Garmin, any avionics shop can work on that. The propeller, MT propeller, any propeller shop can work on that. So what we're really talking about then is airframe specific components, such as if a throttle lever were to break or something along those lines. We are at Rudder Aviation, our facilities in Central Florida, are in the process of creating a large warehouse inventory of Pipistrel Panthera airframe specific parts, and we'll be able to ship those throughout the country overnight, of course, directly. We're going to house thousands of Pipistrel Panthera parts. Now, even with thousands, because of the complexity of the aircraft, it might be possible that we don't have a certain item in the Florida facility. If that's the case, Pipistrel, of course, is located in Italy and Slovenia, and they have 3-day DHL shipping to the United States. So even if it's a component we don't have domestically in the United States, it's very easy to get a component from Europe.
Super. Well, Andy, thanks so much for showing us the Panthera today.
Thank you for having us.
And my thanks to Andy Chen for taking the time to talk with us. After we talked, Andy talked about how sales are going, and I'd say they're doing quite well. He thinks there will be a significant bump in sales after the certificated version comes out in a few years, and I agree that will make the aircraft even more attractive. Somehow we didn't get around to talking price, though I did see Andy talking in another video in which he said that pricing is $639,000 for the experimental version and $672,000 for the certified version. He also said that Pipistrel is looking at other options for powering the Panthera, including a hybrid electric version. And he thought that would provide excellent redundancy and would keep the prop turning and producing power if you lost either the combustion engine or the electric power. So that's a rather exciting prospect, as there's currently nothing like that on the market, though there are some twin-engine aircraft under development using hybrid electric power. Overall, the Panthera looks like a great aircraft, so if you're planning to buy an airplane someday, you may want to check it out. And of course, we have links in our show notes to web pages where you can read more about the Panthera and Right Rudder Aviation. Coming up next, listener feedback, right here on the Aviation News Talk podcast. And here's some feedback from listeners. I get a lot of emails. I try to answer all of them, and some of them make their way onto the show. This one comes from Ed Waters, who said he's planning to sign up as a supporter. He says, I row every morning and listen to podcasts. Are you aware that you've got me in great shape? Thanks, Ed. Well, Ed, creating the podcast has the opposite effect on me, as I spend about 20 hours sitting in front of my computer to create each episode. But listeners will be happy to know that since I stopped flying, I started doing a lot of walking in December, and I've removed that extra 10 pounds I picked up during the pandemic, and I hope to do even better than that in the coming months. So pilots, of course, we all need to stay in shape because we do have to pass an FAA medical every few years or do basic med if we're going to continue to fly. Here's a message from Helen Woods. She says, Max, FYI, 80, now she's talking about 80 octane fuel, has not been produced for a very long time, I think about 20 years. 94 UL for unleaded, which you didn't mention, is an improved drop-in replacement for 80. I run 94 UL on most of my Rotax fleet, as well as my 0300-powered 172. 94 UL is colorless. I teach my students to identify it by its musty smell. Well, Helen, thanks so much for that. This comes from Patrick Wiggins, who's one of our supporters. He says, I just finished listening to the latest episode of Aviation News Talk. Great program, despite the worrisome topic of VFR into IMC. You two have great chemistry. He's referring to Rob Mark, who was on that show, episode 168, which was on weather-related accidents and strategies for avoiding them. He says, hey, just a quick story I was reminded of by something y'all said about spiffy new private pilots not knowing what they don't know. So true. Back when I was working on my private in the early 70s, my old instructor, Bud Lemons at Spartan School of Aeronautics, was the stereotypical grizzled old-timey pilot. This guy has been flying forever and really knew his stuff. Like many today, he didn't think enough was being taught to would-be private pilots, so he had me doing much more than the minimum. At any rate, the day came for my check ride. I passed, thanks to all of his help. After I got back to the school, he came over to me and shook my hand and said something to the effect of, congratulations, you are now a private pilot, but there's no way I'm letting any of my family fly with you. He wasn't being mean and said it with a big smile on his face, but I knew what he was getting at. Again, great show. Looking forward to the next. And yes, there's a reason that getting the private pilot's license is known as a license to learn, because there's just so much to learn in aviation. This comes from Patreon supporter Jay Steffenhagen. He says, your points on possible fuel totalizer errors is well taken. He's referring, by the way, to episode 169, where we talked about fuel gauge accuracy. He writes, a few years ago, while breaking in a factory-new Lycoming in a Cessna 182T, I noticed that the totalizer showed 25% fuel used, which squared with the time, but the gauges showed 25% fuel remaining. I was reluctant to interrupt a break-in protocol, but made a precautionary landing to investigate. Found a huge stream of fuel pouring out of the engine-driven pump. Was lucky there was no fire. Yes, and that's the great thing about having separate fuel totalizer gauges and fuel gauges, because you can compare the two, and if there's a discrepancy, as there was in this case, it can alert you that there might be a problem. Now here's a nice, heartwarming message from Lynn Havens. She says, hi, Max, just wanted to let you know that our annual flight to deliver warm clothes to Pine Ridge is well underway. Now, I first mentioned the coat drive that she talks about here a year ago in episode 130, and just to remind you about that story, Anita Havens, a teacher at Della Davidson Elementary in Oxford, Mississippi, first discovered the need for winter clothing in Wounded Knee, South Dakota back in 2016 while doing some research online. And at that school, Della Davidson, each year dozens of winter coats, many of them practically new, go unclaimed from the lost and found. So Havens spoke with the principal and secured permission to donate the coats, then shared the project with her fourth grade class. Students started bringing in overcoats from home, collecting a total of 350 coats. And last year in 2019, the program grew to the point where they shipped by small aircraft 1,000 winter jackets to needy people at the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation in South Dakota. So it's really a very powerful story of how a few people and pilots can make a huge difference in people's lives. So getting back to this most recent email from Lynn Haven, she writes, Max, just wanted to let you know that our annual flight to deliver warm clothes to Pine Ridge is well underway. 7 planes landed a short time ago, delivering the first load. We leave Mississippi with another 5 planes in the morning. Our donations and pilot participation have more than doubled from last year, thanks in a large part to Aviation News Talk Podcast getting the word out. We just wanted to give you a very heartfelt thank you for your help. It's signed by Lynn and Anita Havens, and they also sent along a link to a video showing the arrival of some of the general aviation aircraft that were transporting some of these winter jackets to these very needy people. And so during this holiday season, you might want to think about what you might be able to do in the coming year to combine your love for aviation with helping other people. I haven't talked a lot in the past about all the work that I did with the Flying Doctors Organization, flying doctors and dentists down to Mexico, but that was very satisfying, and I'm sure there are lots of ways that you can think of to help others. Well, that's it for this episode. Finally, please tell all of your friends about the Aviation News Talk podcast, and if they don't know what a podcast is, send them out to the Apple App Store or the Google Play Store, where they can download our dedicated app for free. Just search in the store for Aviation News Talk. So until next time, fly safely, have fun, and keep the blue side up.